Hello everyone, my name is Nikhil. This is Shelf-Esteem, a booktube channel that is made by a film and television composer specializing in book adaptations, and this is my top 10 Stephen King books of all time. Now, I kind of turned the camera around for this video. This is only my fourth video, but I'm trying some different things, seeing what works, what doesn't, and I really want to make this, a conversational channel where I can talk directly to you all about the books that mean so much to me, and also get recommendations from you. Not only about different books that we could read together, books that I should check out or review on the channel, but then also, how can we make the channel better? Because I'm very receptive to feedback, and I just want to make this a fun place for us all to hang and be able to talk about the books that mean so much to us. So without further ado, just a quick recap on why I started this channel in the first place, for those of you who are just checking it out for the first time. But I'm a film and television composer and lifelong book lover, and I fell in love with the fantasy genre when I first read The Wheel of Time about 5 years ago, and it actually led to me getting a job working as a composer for Lorne Balfe on the Wheel of Time series. So what better way to come full circle on that? And I really wanted to kind of make this channel about the books that we love, but then also what makes a good adaptation, what makes a good soundtrack for that adaptation, and hopefully I can provide some unique insight into that. So that's kind of what this channel is all about. Now, I want to preface this list first. This is not like one of those top 10 ultimate Stephen King books of all time or top 10 fan favorites. This is my personal list of the 45 that I've read so far, or really the 40 novels that are fiction in nature. And I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about the books that mean so much to me. And I would love to hear what your top 10 list is. So if you all are Stephen King fans, Stephen King aficionados, constant readers, and you have any top 10 lists of your own, I would love to see them. Because, honestly, I haven't read all the Stephen King books yet. This list may change as I continue down the path of the beam. And I would love to kind of hear more about what your favorite preferences are and which ones I should move up on my TBR list, my ever-growing TBR list. But without further ado, I just want to give a quick background into what made me love Stephen King. When I was 13 years old and I was really fully into reading, the first book I ever read of Stephen King's was Pet Sematary, and I just fell in love with it. I mean, it was my gateway to horror. It was my gateway to reading, adult books. Before that, I was reading like Goosebumps and things like that. So it was kind of my first real foray into adult novels, and the visceral nature of that book just really captured my heart. And so then I immediately went and saved up 2 months allowance, which was like $8. I made like $1 a week in allowance at that time. And I went to the bookstore and I got Stephen King's It. And, I started reading it. I loved it, but it was really disturbing for me at that age. And I said, I'll put it down and revisit it in a few years. And a few years became like 10, 15 years, I think, when I finally actually picked it up again. And that rekindled my love of Stephen King. I suddenly made it through It, and then, the Dark Tower series, and so many more. And so he's really just been a big mainstay in my life as far as getting me back into reading, getting me reading adult novels. So something that really means a lot to me. And so without further ado, here are my top 10. So number 10 may surprise some people, but really meant a lot to me when I read it. And I was kind of at a point where I was looking for something a little bit different than King's usual horror fare. And, he had started branching out in the 90s and writing family dramas, all sorts of things, sci-fi. I wanted to explore some of his other works. So I decided to pick up book 1 in the Mr. Mercedes trilogy, which if you haven't read it, you absolutely have to check it out. I mean, the first few chapters start off with a bang, and it's kind of a very well-paced, well-plotted crime thriller. Featuring some characters that start to reoccur in other series. It's not too long. It's probably, 400 pages or so. I think 450 pages or so. So it's a quick read, and it just moves really fast, and the characters are brilliant. And it really sets the tone for the trilogy and then some of the other books to come. Number 10, Mr. Mercedes. Read it. Ah! Number 9 is my very dilapidated copy of The Dead Zone. Look at that. Book club edition right here. This is about a guy who gets in an accident, goes into a coma, and wakes up with kind of the ability to see events that haven't happened yet. And if you look at some of the political ramifications in this book, they're very reminiscent of the things that have been going on the last few years. It's very interesting to see how prescient it was of the times we're currently living in. And of course, it's got this weird, like, psychedelic sci-fi element. And the characters are brilliant in this one. So definitely go pick up The Dead Zone. Number 8 really could be higher up on this list if it wasn't for so many other great choices, which is always hard to decide with Stephen King. But number 8 is Needful Things. Now, this is kind of in my opinion, an underrated gem of Stephen King's. It's about a shop that mysteriously appears in the town of Castle Rock, which will appear in other stories as well. The shopkeeper, Leland Gaunt, is able to offer anyone what their heart desires at a price. The characters are just incredibly written. I mean, it's really showing you this town that comes to life in the characters. He develops every single character so that you feel something for each and every one. Nobody's really a side character. They're all kind of actors in this play. It reads really fast, which, it seems like a really kind of a thick book, but it actually goes really fast. And one of the most enduring King villains, I think. So definitely pick it up. Needful Things, number 8. Number 7. This one, if you weren't already pissed about any of my other rankings, this one might really piss you off. But it is The Shining. Now, of course, this is an undisputed classic. It has spawned, possibly his greatest adaptation in Kubrick's The Shining. But, I love the book and I love the film. And I think, my mistake was watching the film before reading the book. I think the book and the film are quite different. Jack Torrance's character and how he goes from where he was to where he ends up later in the novel is way more widely explored in this than Kubrick's The Shining. I think that some of this Kubrick's choices really made that film stand on its own. A little bit hard to kind of separate the two for me, but I love this novel. And again, it would be much higher up on my list personally as a reading experience had I A, not watched the movie first, and B, had it not been for all these other amazing books that are on the list. So this is number 6 right here. Number 6, I don't happen to have the copy of the novel with me, but I'm just posting the image here in the corner, is Salem's Lot. Now, this was his second published novel, and you know how you usually see with authors where you read their first couple of books and you feel like, oh, this is pretty good. I'd love to keep reading and see, what they're going to do next, especially for younger published authors and who are just kind of getting started in their career. I felt like this was a fully fleshed out novel for Stephen King. I mean, the jump that he makes from Carrie to Salem's Lot is huge. And then the jumps he would continue to make throughout the late 70s and through the 80s. Were just quantum leaps in his writing. And this is no exception. I felt like he makes this town come to life in a way that, he really perfects in other novels like Needful Things, I think. But you really feel like this is the first inkling of him going, how can I get all these characters to really matter to the reader? And he does it in spades. He makes vampires super scary, which, I think a lot of modern vampire novels don't really necessarily feel scary, or they feel, a little bit more watered down. I felt like this is kind of very almost realistic in a way that, like, if vampires were to take over this town, like, what would that feel like? Which kind of feels funny to say because, vampires, but you get the idea. Fantastic novel, number 6, Salem's Lot. Please go ahead and read it. It is one of Stephen King's earlier novels, but one of his best in my opinion. Number 5, a lot of people's number 1, my number 5, The Stand. What a fantastic book. So I read the unabridged version and I absolutely adored it from beginning to end. I thought it was just a fantastic book. The ending itself, I felt like suffered a little bit for me. It wasn't quite the ending I was looking for. I felt like it was a little bit weak in the end, but all the way through, the character development is just fantastic. It's basically about what if a plague type event wipes out like 99.6% of the population. And what would happen to society, that's left? And what kind of battles will they have to fight in the future? Really fantastic story of like biblically epic proportions. The Stand is a must read if you haven't read it. And it actually reads surprisingly fast for being like 1,200 pages. Fantastic book. Number 4 goes back to the first Stephen King book I ever read, and that is an even more dilapidated copy of Pet Sematary. This thing is like falling apart, but I just can't part with it. It's just too great. It's like when you get a book from when you're a kid and you just wear that thing down and you don't want to get rid of it because it has so much sentimental value. So I'll probably keep reading this until it falls apart. Then I'll tape it back together and keep reading it some more. I've read it now twice, and I read it first when I was 13 years old. I read it recently about a year ago as an adult. And, it meant very different things to me both times. When I first read it as a kid, it was the horror nature of it, the unsettling nature of it, the plot element about this mysterious cemetery, pet cemetery that's built over an Indian burial ground, and kind of explores the nature of grief and wanting to see your loved ones again, and what price would you pay to see your loved ones again. When I was a kid, more of the horror elements were what really excited me. But as an adult, the nature of grief was just so deeply explored in this book. I've never seen grief explored in quite this way before. So it really affected me profoundly reading it about a year ago. And then, of course, reading it at the beginning, it started by Stephen King journey. So for that reason, number 4, Pet Sematary. Read it. It's a fast-paced read. It's as dramatic as it's horrifying. And all of the character development, in the first 2/3 of the book, I think really leads to a solid finale. And I think this is probably one of my favorite third acts in any Stephen King book. So highly recommend checking it out. Number 4. Number 3, again, would be most people's number 1, It. The other book that I'd started as a child, as a 13-year-old, and then finished as an adult, It. From the beginning to the end, one of Stephen King's most enduring characters, Pennywise, kids coming back as a coming-of-age story to finish what they started. This is one of the most fantastically messy, disturbingly beautiful books I've ever read. And, it plays on the idea of innocence and youth lost. And, what happens when you become an adult, and what do you lose in that process of growing older. So I think that was, really part of this book that resonated the most with me. And of course, the horror part is iconic, but the coming of age story in it is just unmatched to me. So number 3, It. Number 2, see, if I could pick, it's hard for me to pick this one because the Dark Tower series has meant so much to me, and I could just choose the whole Dark Tower series, but I just felt like that was a little bit of a cop-out. And I was trying to figure out what is the one book, if I could just say one book, that really means the most to me in that series. And if I had to choose one, it would be book number 3, The Wastelands. Now, book number 1 is a little bit of a tough read for a lot of people. It's only 280 pages or so. But it's a little drier. It's a little different kind of a Stephen King style. He'd started it in the early 70s, I believe, when he was still a kid. So, his style of writing evolved as it went. And I think it was serialized at the very beginning. So, it was kind of a different format entirely. But book 2 onwards just picks up like a rocket. And it is the most unique fantasy series. It's in my top 10, fantasy series of all time. Absolutely, without a doubt. It's hard to even quantify as fantasy because it's got fantasy, it's got horror, it's got kind of philosophy, it's got science fiction, it's got pop culture references. I mean, it's all over the map, and it's really hard to even pinpoint to a genre. But if I had to choose one book, it's the third one. And the reason is, it is probably one of the most trippiest books. I really felt like this was the first book where the quartet, which, if you don't know, it's not really a spoiler, but the quartet, which is a group in this book, is fully formed. And you really start to feel like this journey is taking shape. Roland, the main character of the book, in the first 2, I feel like, as was important to his arc, was more of a stilted character, a little bit more mechanical, a little bit more machine-like. In this one, you start to feel him become a little bit more humanized. And the character development really all across is just fantastic. And you have iconic characters like Gasher, the TikTok man. Again, not a spoiler because it doesn't really mean anything in the context of, if you don't know what's going on in the book. But really just fantastic characters in this. Very imaginative, psychedelic, weird, bizarre, interesting, horrifying fantasy. Really great, number 2. And number 1, it probably will shock some people, but it is actually not really a horror book. And it was written like in the last 15 years. It was a book that meant a lot to me because I think I was at the point in my life where I was really ready to receive questions about, the ephemeral nature of life and, about the past. And if one could change the past, what would one do differently? And that book, without a doubt for me, is 11/22/63. Another book that is genre bending. It has political intrigue. It has historical fiction references. It has time travel. It has one of the best romances I have ever read. I never thought I would expect that in a Stephen King book. He absolutely sticks the landing. It really makes you question life. I feel like this one and The Wasteland, I really remember who I was before that. And after I read these two books, I kind of read them very close together as well in 2016. I was going through kind of a tough period in my life. I was questioning a lot of things about my career path and about what life really means to me. And I really feel like this book cemented it for me that Stephen King is my absolute favorite author of all time. And, you know, this book is, again, another fast-paced, fantastic characters. The idea of the synopsis of the book, in case you don't know, spoiler-free, of course. The synopsis of this book, spoiler-free, of course, is Jake Epping gets the experience of a lifetime to travel back in time to try to stop the Kennedy assassination. Now, the trick is he can only go back to a certain date in 1958. Now, if you know your history, Kennedy was assassinated in 1963. So he has to actually live in 1958 and work up his way towards that fateful day and try to stop it. And if he's not able to, he could try again, but he's getting older and time keeps moving forward. And he can only go back to that fateful day in 1958 and live to try again. Fantastic premise. And it really gets you thinking about what would happen if you had the chance to change the past. What would you do with such a responsibility? Truly an epic masterwork of Stephen King and some of his best writing to date. I couldn't recommend it enough. So please, whatever you do, if you want a non-horror Stephen King and you don't want to go off of the usual classics that you see on everybody's list, please check out 11/22/63. Do yourself a favor. I promise you won't regret it. That's my top 10 of Stephen King. Thank you so much for watching. Again, I'm Nikhil with Shelf-Esteem. Please like and subscribe. Keeps the channel going, and I really look forward to talking more with you all about the books that we love so much. And I would love to know, again, your top 10 Stephen King list. So please leave it in the comments and let me know what you think I should be reading. Let me know if you think this list is completely wrong. I'm happy to hear any, vehement disagreements you have with me, and why? Because, I want to discover more cool books too, right? So let's have make this a dialogue and discussion, and let's have a good time talking about these books together, all right? I'm Nikhil again. Thank you so much for watching. See you next time.